Chapter 18. Lord Felix was going to send him away. Eiji was sure of it. Oh, the god was as attentive as ever. He'd spent the whole prior evening, that night, and most of this day fetching and carrying things for Eiji and adjusting his bedding. Eiji had only prevented his master from helping him to the chamber pot by pointing out as humbly as he could that he'd injured his shoulder, not his legs. When he wasn't fussing or bustling, Lord Felix nestled next to Eiji on the bed with his book, and they sat quietly. But now the god was uncomfortable. He kept opening his mouth to speak, then closing it again, and he darted nervous looks in Eiji's direction. Clearly, he had something to say that Eiji wouldn't like hearing, and the most obvious possibility was that he was tired of trying to make his useless offering into whatever it was he wanted him to be. Eiji wanted to scream and cry and throw himself at his master's feet and plead for another chance, but instead he found himself frozen, waiting for Lord Felix to speak. "Eiji," the god said at last, hesitantly, "there's something I want to ask you, but I need you to promise me that if you don't want to do it, you'll tell me." Eiji's head pounded, and when he managed to push his voice out through his trembling lips, it sounded like it was coming from 100 leagues away. "Yes, my lord." "Good." Another endless hesitation, then, "I usually have some friends over on the second evening of the week. We play games mostly, but there's also a lot of talk, and I know you're not feeling well, so if you don't feel like dealing with all that activity, I can just cancel. It wouldn't be any trouble." Oh, gods! Eiji went limp with relief. Not only was this far preferable to being banished, it even offered him a chance to redeem himself for his 2 days of uselessness. He could wait on the gods, and perhaps, if he was lucky, he'd be called upon for entertainment. His shoulder would make dancing impossible, or at least unimpressive, but he could still sing and recite. This was a wonderful opportunity. "I would love that, my lord," he told his master. "Please don't cancel your plans." Lord Felix beamed, no doubt hearing the sincerity in his voice. "All right. Thank you, sweetheart." Eiji bent his head and smiled as the god fetched him another cup of tea. The coddling was easier to bear when he knew that this evening he would finally be allowed to serve as he'd been trained. He planned for the rest of the afternoon. Perhaps one of the gods would simply require a particular song or poem, and he would have to hope that his memory would serve. However, it seemed likely that Lord Felix would allow him to entertain them as he pleased, so he should have his own selections ready. He settled on some of Messiah's most popular love poems and a hymn to Lord Felix that had always sounded good in his register. He went over them in his mind to make sure he recalled all the words as his master scattered cushions over the floor and retrieved strange boards and cards from his wardrobe. "Is there any way your servant could be of assistance, my lord?" Eiji asked. Lord Felix looked up at him with a little smile, which brightened when he saw that Eiji was looking back. Somehow, over the long, lazy hours of his recovery, he'd stopped feeling the need to avoid his master's gaze. Lord Felix's obvious pleasure in this development made him feel a little shy, but not in an unpleasant way. "There's not much to do in the first place, dear. The god was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Ah, would you mind answering that?" Eiji tried to steel himself as he headed for the door. He hadn't dared to ask whether Lord Antony would be attending, but he needed to accept that it was a possibility. He took in a deep breath, then let it out as he opened the door, knees already bending to make what semblance of a bow his shoulder would permit. "Eiji!" The cheerful cry was accompanied by a slender little body barreling into his chest. "Norio?" Zenji's calm, "Stop that, Norio," mingled with an anxious cry of, "Careful, you'll hurt him," from Rokuro. Eiji's head spun. What were they doing here? Had they come to provide blood for the gods? Or... "Norio and Rokuro! You're finally joining us?" Lord Felix called cheerfully from the sitting room. "I thought I'd never convince you." "You didn't," Zenji replied. "They wanted to come visit Eiji. Come on, everyone, out of the doorway." Eiji stepped back automatically, mind still rushing to catch up with the situation. His confusion was interrupted by Lord Felix's laugh. I knew you'd all end up liking Eiji better than you like me, but I didn't think it would happen that fast. Thank you for luring them here, dear. Eiji wasn't sure how to respond to that. His instinct was to apologize, but Norio was already talking. Did I jostle you? He demanded. I'm so sorry. I just got excited. No, Eiji managed. I'm fine. Good. Rokuro gave his good shoulder a cautious pat. We were all sorry to hear about your injury. We've missed you. Eiji started to apologize, but Lord Felix said, He would have been back at work today if it weren't for my begging and Zenji's orders. That's no surprise. Norio socked Rokuro lightly on his arm. Spend enough time with Eiji and you'll see. He's tough as shark skin. The words caught Eiji off guard. Was Norio mocking him? But no, the other man's smile was totally sincere as the three kitchen workers trailed into the sitting room to sprawl on the cushions with Lord Felix. Eiji didn't feel tough. He felt so fragile all the time, like he was always just a word or a movement or, worse yet, a thought from his own head away from fracturing into hundreds of pieces. He felt desperately, abjectly submissive towards Lord Felix. He felt weak, needy, useless. He felt soft and exposed in 1,000 ways. But Lord Felix was nodding. I agree. Eiji is amazingly tough. Eji's standing right there, Zenji observed. The god smiled. Of course. Forgive me, Eiji. I didn't mean to be rude. Eiji was saved from coming up with a response to that by another knock at the door. In all, they ended up cramming 9 guests into the little sitting room. Only one other person came from the kitchens, Yudai, a quiet man who immediately offered Eiji sympathy for his injury, despite the fact that they'd never exchanged even a single word before. The rest came from the laundry and Lord Cloelia's fishing operation, except for a man named Bunta who said he belonged to Lord Theodora and greeted Zenji with a kiss. Eiji stayed standing. He knew he was staring, but his head was spinning too dizzily for him to muster the strength to stop. When Lord Felix had said he hosted his friends every week, he'd meant humans? There could be no other explanation. The men had all filed in with the ease of long practice. They'd greeted Lord Felix with quick, shallow bows, if they'd bothered bowing at all, which most did not. Lord Felix had distributed steaming cups of tea, and now everyone was chatting the way Eji's cadre had done in the gardens after their lessons. It felt unreal. I don't think anyone else is coming, Lord Felix said at last. For those who don't know, this is Rokuro, this is Norio, and this is Eiji. Which one's the new attendant? That was a burly man who Eiji thought worked in the fishery, though he couldn't remember his name. Lord Felix beamed. Eiji was kind enough to accept my offer. Sweetheart, why don't you sit with us? Eiji obeyed numbly, kneeling between Rokuro and Yudai. Grins sprouted all around the little circle, and the burly man gave a whoop. Congratulations, Eiji, he rumbled. You're a lucky bastard. Flustered by the man's crude speech, Eiji nevertheless lowered his head in acknowledgement. Yes, I am. I think I'm the lucky one, Lord Felix put in. You won't be once we start playing. The man cracked his knuckles like he was in some kind of tavern, or what Eiji imagined a tavern would be, anyway. I feel hot tonight. What are we playing? We could play Reef Shark, Yudai offered quietly, and several men groaned, including Lord Felix. Hell no, Bunta said, nestling even tighter against Zenji's shoulder. You cheat! Every time, Lord Felix agreed. Yudai crossed his arms behind his head and leaned back into his cushion, smiling. You can't prove it. How were they all so relaxed in the presence of a god? They were using coarse language, sprawling on their asses with no attention to proper form and positions, and bantering as if he were just another human. They were being unspeakably rude. And Lord Felix seemed to love it. He was laughing and chattering along with them, more relaxed than Eiji had ever seen him. When Zenji swatted playfully at him, he practically glowed. The sight of his pleasure sent a pang through Eji's chest. Is this what he wants from me? Did his master hope that Eiji would throw away a lifetime's training to chatter and lounge like this? Did he want him to tease with this kind of reckless abandon? Did he expect Eiji to treat him like a human friend? If that was what Lord Felix wanted, Eiji was doomed to fail. He couldn't even relax like this among his not even friends. He didn't have friends. He had acquaintances at best. How could he ever behave this way to a god, any god, let alone his own master? Impossible. The thought was appalling. He might have consistently fallen short of being the ideal offering, but he'd at least been in sight of his goal. This breezy, unafraid demeanor was so far out of his reach it was laughable. To think he'd felt so bold and proud because he'd finally managed to meet his master's gaze without permission. Eiji? Rokuro's soft voice broke through his haze of despair. Are you all right? Most of the others were still arguing about what game to play, but Zenji, Rokuro, and Lord Felix were all looking worriedly at him. The blood rushed to Eiji's face, and he barely kept himself from ducking into his full bow. Of course, he told Rokuro with the best smile he could squeeze up. Forgive me, the medicine drops make me a little drowsy. He kept up his smile as the group settled on a game to start with. Luckily, it was one he knew, Kings and Camels. Bunta dealt the cards, and Eiji gazed down at his hand, only half seeing it. Bunta, why? Zenji moaned theatrically as he glowered at his own cards. I thought you loved me! This prompted a general outcry as everybody moaned about his supposedly terrible cards. Eiji gawked around in mounting confusion. Surely not everybody could have such a bad hand. We should declare a misdeal, Lord Felix said. Eiji was obediently folding his cards to give them back when Bunta replied, Oh, stop whining, Felix. He said it so matter-of-factly that it took Eiji a moment to process what he just heard, but when he did, he froze. Rokuro and Norio stiffened as well, all three of them waiting helplessly for the explosion. When Lord Felix spoke, however, his voice was gentle. I should have told you three. Our game nights are sacred. Everyone's free to disregard all the formalities here. I'm sorry if you were startled. Zenji mentioned as much, Norio said after a moment. Hearing it in person is different, though. Lord Felix looked right at Eiji. Zenji was more considerate than I was. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have warned you. Oh, gods! Did Lord Felix expect him to do that too? With a sickening twist of his gut, Eiji remembered what his master had said after kissing him. If I'd been fantasizing, you would have said my name. He'd never manage it! Never in 100 years! He was mortified to feel tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. Not in front of all these people! My lord owes his servant no apologies. The words might have been correct, but they felt out of place in this casual gathering, and Eiji flushed anew. All right, I'm going first, Zenji said loudly. Eiji could have wept in gratitude for the change of subject. The game was simple enough that conversation was able to flow freely as they played. The others were obviously going out of their way to include the three newcomers in the conversation. In particular, they peppered Eiji and Norio, who were the youngest men present, with questions about what the temple had been like when they left it. Which priests had retired or died? Which had been promoted? Had there been any changes in the curriculum? Had they been taught any trendy new dances or given any cutting-edge poetry to memorize? On and on it went. I don't know why you're all so nostalgic all of a sudden, Bunta groused after this had been going on for several turns. If I never think of that place again, it'll be too soon. It wasn't all bad, the burly man from before, Hanzo, said wistfully. Those gardens! And the food was better than what we get here. Hey! Rokuro sounded genuinely stung. I liked all the reading, another man put in. I still have time, and goodness knows Felix won't stop pestering me with recommendations, but somehow I just don't get around to it without someone forcing me. Yudai sighed. I miss listening to the singing. I never liked singing myself all that much, but there were a few boys in my cadre who sang like birds. I loved listening to them practice. Eiji was the best in our cadre, Norio boasted. We all used to crowd around to hear him. I was not, Eiji argued. True, he'd been the best baritone, but the finest singing voice had of course belonged to Akito. His soaring tenor had been unmatchable. Oh, don't be so modest, Hanzo coaxed. Sing something for us. Just one song so Yudai will stop pining for the old days. Yudai rolled his eyes and drew a card. I'm not pining. I would love to hear it, though. Come on, Eiji, Norio urged. Show them! Eiji darted a look at Lord Felix. The god didn't press him like the others, but he peered at Eiji with avid interest. Since Eiji was reduced to guessing at his master's will, he guessed that Lord Felix wanted to hear him sing as well. Well, he did have that hymn prepared. Now that it came down to it, he felt a little shy about singing a psalm to Lord Felix with Lord Felix right there in the room, but perhaps it would be a good thing. Maybe this was a way he could please his master, even if he couldn't relax like the others. At least it would show the god that Eiji wanted to do something for him. All right. His face was already heating as he gave an experimental hum. It won't be very impressive, though. We'll be the judges of that, Bunta said warmly. There was only one judge present who Eiji cared about. He stole another glance at his master, then fixed his gaze on his cards so he wouldn't have to look anyone in the eyes as he sang. I sing to honor the battle lord Felix, fearful in his wrath and inexorable in his vengeance. I sing to honor the war god Felix, maker of orphans and scourge of the barbarian. His enemies have no recourse, though they fight, his might overpowers them. Though they hide, his eye perceives them. Though they flee, his hand stretches out to seize them. Though they plead, his heart is not stirred by mercy for them. In the days of King Hafumi, he stood alone before the barbarian horde. 100 heads he cleaved from strong shoulders. 100 swords he tore from mighty hands. 100 hearts he drained of all their ready tribute. 100 souls he cast down to the underworld. His blade drinks deep but is not sated. No slaughter can appease. Eiji, that's enough. Zenji's voice was calm, but sharp enough to stop Eiji mid-verse. He looked up from his cards, startled. He was surrounded by a circle of stricken faces. Instead of looking at him, though, most were turned towards Lord Felix. Eiji turned that way as well, his stomach knotting into a tight ball. The sight that met him was worse even than he had expected. The god was looking at him as if Eiji had slapped him across the face. His eyes were wide, wounded, haunted, and worst of all, shimmering with tears. Eiji froze. He didn't know what he'd done wrong, but clearly he had erred in an appalling way. What should he do? If the others weren't there, he would just press down into his bow, Lord Julia's instructions be damned, and supplicate at his master's feet. He could still plead forgiveness for displeasing the god, but that seemed likely to ruin the casual atmosphere of the gathering, as if it weren't already obviously ruined. So what? Worse even than the sight of Lord Felix's stricken tears was the sight of him blinking them back and giving everyone a forced smile. I'm fine, he assured the group, and Eiji had told that lie himself often enough to recognize its falsehood. Norio was right, Eiji. You have a lovely voice. Please excuse me for a moment. We need some more hot water for the tea. I'll be right back. With that, Lord Felix snatched up the half-full pot and strode out of the room. His steps were controlled, he didn't rush, and he closed the door softly behind himself. Still, Eiji couldn't shake the feeling that the god was running away.